Welcome to the Rando Podcast, everyone. I'm Chris Crimson.
And I'm Nyx. If you're new around here, we'd love it if you hit that subscribe button so you don't miss our future deep dives.
Absolutely. We really appreciate you joining our conversation. And a big thank you to our sponsors over on YouTube, Chris, the Plant-Based, and Emma Advanced.
Yeah, thanks, guys. Your support makes these explorations possible.
It really does.
So today we're diving into something a little unusual, maybe? The idea of bread napkins.
Bread napkins, yeah. It sounds a bit out there, I know.
Right. But we've been digging through some articles, some reports, looking at the practicality, sustainability, the whole innovation angle.
And our mission today, for you listening, is basically to figure out if this seemingly odd idea actually has, well, legs.
Yeah.
Could it be a real thing for a more sustainable, maybe even just a more interesting dining experience?
Exactly. Let's see if we can unpack this quickly, but, thoroughly. So, bread napkins. Might sound super modern, almost futuristic, maybe a bit bizarre.
Definitely unconventional.
But what's kind of fascinating is that using bread this way, it's not entirely new. There's actually historical precedent.
Oh, really? Like how far back are we talking?
Way back. Ancient Greece. They actually used bread as, well, a cleaning tool.
No way, bread. For wiping.
Yeah. They even had a word for it. Apomagdalia. Literally translates to wipe off.
Apomagdalia. Never heard that before.
Me neither before looking into this. And it even pops up in literature. The playwright Aristophanes mentions it in his comedy, Knights.
Okay, so it was common enough to be in a play.
Apparently so. And the detail he includes is that this wipe-off bread was often just given to the dogs afterward.
Given to the dogs. Wow. Okay, so use it to clean your hands, then toss it to Fido. Different times, I guess.
Very different hygiene standards, for sure. But it wasn't just Aristophanes. Others like Alciphron and Plutarch, they also mentioned this custom.
So multiple sources confirm it. Interesting.
Yeah. So while obviously we think about hygiene differently now, it shows the basic concept bread doing double duty at the table has been around. It's like the seed of the idea.
This is a really surprising historical nugget to start with. Okay, so fast forward a couple millennia. Are bread napkins like a thing now? Because I haven't seen any.
No, you're right. You almost certainly haven't. Our sources are pretty clear. Bread napkins are definitely not mainstream right now.
Right.
If you search online for edible napkins, what you mostly find are those paper ones with edible prints.
Ah, yeah, I think I've seen those. Rice paper, seaweed, that kind of thing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
More of a novelty, really. It's about the fact that you can eat the napkin, not about using bread's texture to actually absorb stuff.
Gotcha. So not really fulfilling the napkin function in the same way bread might.
Precisely. There are some sort of tangential connections, though. You know how sometimes you see cloth napkins folded fancy in a bread basket?
Oh, yeah, to hold the rolls?
Yeah, right. So there's that existing association of bread and napkins at the table, even if it's usually cloth doing the napkin job.
Okay.
And interestingly, we did find a Reddit discussion. Someone was actually suggesting using really thin breads, like markook bread.
Arkook, that super thin Lebanese bread.
Yeah, that's the one. They even suggested maybe dyeing it for color. So the idea is definitely percolating a bit online, in those early idea stages.
A Reddit thread.
Ah.
The birthplace of many a strange and wonderful idea. It does sort of highlight a potential gap, though, doesn't it?
How so?
Well, you've got these novelty edible print napkins. But bread offers something different. Its texture, its potential absorbency, just how familiar it is as a food. It could be a unique alternative if, and it's a big if, the challenges can be met.
Okay, let's talk about those challenges then. How would you actually make a bread napkin that, works, does the job? What kind of bread are we even talking about?
Right, this is where the baking science gets kind of cool. You really have to think about achieving the right texture and, crucially, absorbency.
Like a sponge, almost.
Sort of, yeah. Different breads have different structures. Take sourdough, for example.
Yeah.
It's known for that open crumb structure, all those holes and air pockets.
Mm-hmm.
Well, those could potentially trap liquids and little bits of food quite well.
Okay, I can picture that, like tiny little cleaning pockets.
Exactly. Then you could look at high-fiber breads, especially ones with added stuff like psyllium seed husks.
Oh, psyllium, yeah, that stuff really absorbs water.
It does. So adding that could seriously boost the absorbency factor.
Yeah.
But then on the other end, you have flatbreads, like that markook we mentioned. They're super thin, pliable, maybe easier to handle like a traditional napkin.
So it's a trade-off. Thin and foldable versus maybe thicker and more absorbent.
Could be. Or maybe different breads for different uses. We also looked at things like cornbread. It's got that slightly gritty texture from the cornmeal, which can be pretty absorbent.
Yeah, cornbread does soak things up.
And focaccia. It's got a moist interior, and maybe the olive oil in it helps with pliability too.
Right.
But it's not just the type of bread. The baking technique is critical. How much water you use, the hydration level that dramatically changes the crumb structure.
Okay, so more water, maybe more open holes.
Dearly, yeah. And the flour choice is huge too. Bread flour, with its higher protein, tends to absorb more water. Whole wheat flour, with the bran, also adds to the absorbency and texture.
Wow. Okay, so it's definitely not just any old slice of bread. It has to be engineered almost.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
And then there's the durability issue. You don't want it just disintegrating in your hand.
Definitely not. That would be messier than the original problem.
Exactly. So things like gluten content are important. Bread flour's higher gluten gives it structure, elasticity.
Keeps it together.
Right. Or you could blend flours, maybe mix whole wheat with bread flour. And if you're going gluten-free, you'd absolutely need binders.
Like what?
Things like psyllium husk again, or chia seeds, flax seeds. They form gels and help hold it all together. Even adding fats like olive oil or maybe a vegan butter can make it more flexible, less brittle.
So it's this balancing act, getting it absorbent enough, but also strong enough.
Precisely. You need that open structure for absorption, but enough integrity for practical use.
It's actually quite complex when you break it down. Our sources even had a table comparing potential breads, sourdough, flatbread, high-fiber, cornbread, focaccia, listing pros and cons for texture, absorbency, durability, and flavor.
Ah, yes, flavor. That's the next interesting layer, isn't it? Why stop at plain? Flavor could enhance the whole experience.
Ooh, flavored bread napkins. Now you're talking. Like what? Savory ones?
Yeah, totally. For main courses, imagine incorporating herbs, rosemary, thyme, garlic, right into the dough.
Garlic bread napkin.
Right, or spices like cumin, paprika. You could even use nutritional yeast for a sort of cheesy umami kick.
That could pair well with certain meal.
Definitely. Or even just simple vegetable powders like onion or garlic powder. The idea is to think about flavors that would actually complement common dishes. And then for desserts, or maybe lighter meals, you could go slightly sweet.
Sweet napkins.
Just subtly. Think natural sweeteners like a touch of maple syrup or agave, warm spices like cinnamon, maybe even fruit purees, applesauce, banana for sweetness and moisture.
Okay, like a cinnamon one with apple pie. I could see that. But delicate, right? Not like cake.
Exactly. A delicate balance is key. You wouldn't want it overpowering the dessert itself.
So potential for savory and sweet options, that's really expanding the concept.
It is. But, the sources also make a really good point about neutral flavors.
For versatility.
Yeah. For widespread adoption, especially in restaurants serving all kinds of different food, a simple, plain, maybe slightly weedy flavor is probably the most adaptable. You don't want your napkin clashing with your entree.
Good point. A neutral base is often best. Okay, so we've got the how-to and the flavor potential. Let's circle back to the why, the sustainability angle. How do these actually stack up environmentally?
Yeah, this is crucial. And it requires looking at the big picture, comparing resource use across the entire life cycle. Bread versus paper versus cloth.
Okay, so what kind of resources are we talking about?
Well, water is a big one. Water to grow the wheat, water in baking. Then there's energy. Farming, milling, baking for the bread. Paper needs water, energy, trees, or recycled pulp, often chemicals.
Right, and cloth napkins.
Cloth needs water and energy to grow the cotton or linen, process it, and then significant water and energy for repeated washing and drying.
The washing is a big factor for cloth.
It really is. And for bread, you also have to consider things like fertilizers used in wheat farming, which can contribute to greenhouse gas emissions. To get a true comparison, you really need a comprehensive life cycle assessment.
Comparing apples to apples, basically, from farm to, well, napkin or mouth.
Exactly. What about the waste aspect? That seems like the most obvious potential win for bread napkins, doesn't it?
It does. If you eat it, it's not going to landfill like a paper napkin.
That's the core argument. Single-use paper creates tons of waste. Bread napkins, if consumed, could drastically reduce that. Cloth minimizes waste through reuse, but they still wear out eventually and get disposed of.
But the key phrase there is if consumed, right?
Absolutely. It hinges entirely on consumer behavior. If people don't eat them, they just become food waste, which might be compostable, which is better than landfill, but still waste.
So user adoption, actually eating it, is paramount for the waste benefit. What about the carbon footprint overall?
Again, you need that full life cycle view. Emissions from agriculture, manufacturing, transport, disposal, or consumption.
Does local sourcing help there, like making the bread napkins locally?
Potentially, yes.
Okay.
Sourcing ingredients and baking locally could cut down significantly on transportation emissions compared to, say, shipping paper napkins long distances. But the overall footprint is complex. It depends on farming practices, energy sources for baking, transportation, and ultimately, that consumption rate.
It sounds like we need more specific data on bread napkins to really compare properly.
That's what the sources suggest, too. They often include comparison tables, water use, energy emissions, waste for paper and cloth. But for bread napkins, the data is often marked as needs further research or to be determined.
Which tells us the potential is there environmentally, but it's not yet quantified definitively.
Exactly. The theory makes sense, but we need the numbers to back it up.
Still, that direct link to reducing food waste if eaten seems pretty powerful on its own.
It's a very direct impact, yeah. An edible alternative prevents disposable waste.
Mm-hmm.
But again, what happens if you don't eat it all?
Right, you might use half of it.
Yeah.
Then what? Leave a soggy, half-eaten bread thing on your plate?
Probably not ideal.
Mm.
So the sources suggest thinking about repurposing leftovers.
Like stale bread, croutons, breadcrumbs.
Exactly. Just like regular leftover bread.
Mm-hmm.
Or even, going back to the Greeks, animal feed. Maybe restaurants could collect uneaten ones for composting or specific repurposing programs. Or give diners suggestions for home use.
Turning potential waste back into a resource. Clever. You know, thinking about this, it feels like the idea could go beyond just hand wiping.
Oh, for sure. Once you break out of the traditional napkin box, lots of possibilities open up.
Like what?
Well, imagine larger, thinner sheets. Edible placemats.
Whoa! Eat your placemat after the meal.
Why not? Or pliable breads as edible wrappers for sandwiches, wraps, replacing plastic or foil.
Edible food wraps. I like that. Less packaging waste.
Definitely. And flavored breads could be more integrated into the meal itself, like little edible chips for dips.
Instead of tortilla chips.
Maybe. Or as part of a deconstructed dish, serving both a functional wiping purpose and a textural element. Or even just a subtly flavored one acting as a light bread course.
Okay. A multitasking bread element.
And one more fun one. Shaping the dough into edible napkin rings.
Edible napkin rings. That's kind of cute, actually. Decorative and consumable.
Right. So lots of creative avenues. Which brings us to innovation. What's happening in the wider world of edible disposables? Are people patenting this kind of stuff?
Good question. Is there a trend here?
Well, the broader field is definitely active. You see patents for edible packaging made from seaweed, starch, even milk protein.
Edible packaging is becoming a bigger thing, yeah.
And edible cutlery, too.
Yeah.
Made from grains, pulses. So there's clearly a recognized need and a receptive environment for sustainable, edible alternatives to single-use items. It creates a favorable context for something like bread napkins.
Okay, so the general tide is moving in that direction.
Yeah.
What about patents specifically for bread-based cleaning things or napkins?
That's where it gets a bit thinner. Searching specifically for bread napkins for cleaning doesn't yield a lot of direct hits. We found a design patent for some kind of food product, but it wasn't clear if it was napkin-related.
So nothing exactly matching.
Not quite. There are related things, like a patent for an edible baking liner, another for edible adhesive tape, which could maybe be relevant for layering. And patents for preserving or refreshing bread, those could be relevant for shelf life. But the main takeaway seems to be, while edible disposables are growing, the specific niche of bread napkins for cleaning seems relatively unexplored from an IP perspective.
So potential for real innovation there. A gap in the market, maybe.
Could be. But, as we've touched on, it's not without its hurdles. What are the big roadblocks to seeing these on every table?
Right, the practical challenges. Let's list them out. Hygiene must be number one, surely.
Absolutely. That's likely the biggest initial consumer barrier. The idea of wiping your messy hands or face with something you then eat. It clashes with modern hygiene norms, even if we know about the Greeks.
Yeah, it feels a bit off instinctively.
So clear communication is vital. Emphasizing food-grade production, single-use intent as a napkin before consumption, good, clean packaging would also be essential to reassure people.
Okay, tackle the ick factor head-on with transparency and process. What else? Cost.
Cost is huge. Paper napkins are dirt cheap. Bread, as a raw material, is generally more expensive. Add specialized baking, the cost could be significantly higher.
So you'd be asking restaurants or consumers to pay a premium.
Exactly. You'd need to sell them on the value proposition, the sustainability, the novelty, the experience to justify that potential price difference.
Convince them it's worth it. What about just how well they work? Practicality.
That's critical for long-term adoption.
Yeah.
How absorbent are they really compared to paper or cloth? What's the texture like during wiping? Do they crumble and make more mess?
Yeah, if it's awkward or ineffective, the novelty will wear off fast.
Totally. So consumer education, marketing, showing proper use, highlighting benefits, all important. Initial buzz might come from novelty, but usefulness keeps people using them.
Makes sense. And shelf life. Bread goes stale.
Big issue. Stale bread isn't very appealing to eat after you've used it as a napkin. So you need effective, probably airtight packaging. And maybe exploring those bread preservation techniques we mentioned, as long as they don't compromise safety or edibility.
Right, can't have preservatives that make it unsafe to eat. And lastly, regulations, especially for restaurants.
Yeah, food safety rules would almost certainly apply. Production standards, handling procedures in restaurants. You need clear protocols to minimize any contamination risk if they're intended for consumption after use. Restaurants need to be confident they meet all health codes.
So quite a list of challenges. Hygiene, cost, practicality, shelf life, regulations.
It is. It's not a simple swap,
Yeah.
but the potential is there. The sources see it as this intriguing concept, grounded in a bit of history, with real possibilities for sustainability and innovation, despite the hurdles.
Well, this has been quite the journey into the world of bread napkins. Amazing how deep you can go on something that sounds so simple at first.
It really touches on everything from history and baking science to environmental impact and consumer psychology.
So thinking about that growing push to reduce waste, all the creativity and edible stuff, it makes you wonder.
It does. Which leads us to our final thought for you listening.
Considering this drive to cut down on single-use waste and how inventive food tech is becoming, could bread napkins actually move beyond being just a quirky idea? Could they become, normal? What would you personally need to see or experience to actually use one?
Yeah, what's your tipping point? Something to chew on, perhaps.
Indeed. Okay, that wraps up our deep dive for today on the Rando Podcast. Thanks so much for joining us, everyone.
Yeah, thank you. And if you enjoyed this, please do subscribe so you don't miss what we dive into next time.
We wish you all the very best.
Take care, everyone. Goodbye for now.